In this recording, we'll take a look at some of the more advanced functions and features of the Curity CLI. Let's start with logging into the CLI or starting the CLI here. So you know it's in the bin directory idsh. And if we hit tab, we can get all the functions available. The show configuration command here will just show the full configuration of this instance, which could be useful, but it also shows a lot of information. So we can actually pipe the show configuration to the display command that can show us, for example, JSON. So we get the configuration in a JSON representation, but we can also do other formats like XML, for example. One interesting format here is the set command. So they will display the configuration as several set commands that will essentially set the entire environment. You can see here that this command sets the base URL, and we have the port. Now, taking this further, we can pipe that output to a save command and save it directly to a file. For example, a shell script file. Now, if we exit out of the Curity shell and look at this shell file, it has all of the set commands in it. We don't have to go into detail what all of these do here. But if we now set this to be using the Curity shell and add a commit at the end, because this is going to execute all of these commands as one transaction. And then we have to make the script file executable here. If we now run this, we get an error. The reason for the error here is that you can't run the set commands in operational mode, which is what you end up in the shell when you just start it. We actually have to move into configuration mode. So we need to add a configure command in the beginning of this script here. If we run this now, it runs fine, but no modifications to commit because it's the same configuration that we already have on the system. So let's try to make a change in these settings here. For example, change the base URL to some other host. Save that and run it again. And now we see that the commit is complete. Let's log into the shell again to take a look at the configuration that we just changed. So we can do that with show, and then we have all the previous changes in rollback, so we can do show rollback changes. These are all the changes made to the system. 0 is the last change. So if we do a show rollback changes 0, we see here that if we would roll back to this change, the base URL would be changed back to the previous one that we had before we executed the script to change the base URL. We can also make changes directly in here, obviously. So same commands that were executed in that script, we can just execute one of those commands in here. So, for example, set environments, services, service role, default listening port, for example, is currently 8443. If we just set it to 8444 here, now the change is not committed, so we can run a command that is compare running brief. It will show us the comparison between the change we've made and what the running system is using, and you can see here that it's going to remove 8443 and execute 8444 if you commit it. So if we commit it here and do compare running brief again, we see there are no changes because there are no pending changes to be committed. And again, we can look at the rollback for this. So rollback 0 and comparing running brief. Now we are adding the 8443 port back if we commit this. So now we basically reverted back to the previous change. So we're back at the listening port being 8443. Another useful command that we can look at, if we show the entire configuration here, we can pipe that to the find command. And again, if we take the listening port as an example, find listening port will just jump to the first occurrence of listening port in the configuration. So you could narrow down the search first, or the configuration, to do show and then a subpart of the configuration and then pipe it to find, for example. Here it just jumps to the first occurrence of the listening port. If we instead do find HTML1, I know I have an authenticator called HTML1. It jumps to the HTML forum authenticator named HTML1. Now let's look at how we can export a specific part of the configuration, make a change to it, and import that change. Again, this could be useful for moving configurations between different environments and making modifications to it along the way, for example. So if we look at the configuration here for a specific client, for example, I have a client called www. That shows us the description and secret redirect URIs, scopes that are provided by this client. Now we can add on display this as XML and then pipe it to the save command and save it as an XML file here. We exit the shell, open up the file. This is the XML representation of that client. Now, if we wanted to make a modification to this, and for example, let's say remove a scope. I have a demo scope here. We can delete that scope and save the file. We'll switch back to the terminal here, and in the shell we can now load this configuration file. That has to be done in the configuration mode, so we can load. There are different options for loading: merge, override, replace. So if we try to merge this new configuration or changed configuration I have, that runs okay. But if we now look at the configuration again, it is going to be the same. You see my scope, my demo scope is still here. And that is because a merge just does just that. It merges the configuration and it merges it with the existing configuration. That means whatever is there is not going to be necessarily deleted, right? I can also not use the other options for the configuration, like overwrite, because that would fully overwrite all of the configuration. But there's a way to handle this. We can create a script that makes modifications to what we actually want to load. So now I'm going to create a shell script here, and just for illustration purposes, I'll set a couple of variables within the script itself, making it a little bit more flexible. So we'll set I want to set the secret for this client that I'm loading. We can also, for example, set a variable that is the service that we're modifying or tweaking. In this case, it's named token service. And then we start the shell, the Curity shell within the script. We go into configuration mode and we're going to say load merge and the configuration that I have. And then within that, we can also execute set commands and delete commands. So now I'm merging the configuration, but I'm also setting the secret for the specific client based on the variable that I have. And then I'm deleting the scope using the delete command. Finally commit, and this script is going to run until the end of file here, which means all of this is going to execute as one transaction. So if we try to run this, we need to make the script executable and then run it. Oops, got an error. I think I named my configuration file wrong in the script here. So let's copy this. Save and try that again. Another error. It's the variable is not equal. There we go. That should work. Now that we execute this, it commits successfully as one single transaction. We go back into the shell. We can use the arrow up here to run previous commands. And we can use this one, for example, display it as XML, and now we can see that the demo scope is indeed removed when we loaded this client again. So that's it for this slightly more advanced look at the Curity shell. Hope this gave and inspired to some ideas of what's possible within the shell in terms of exporting, extracting configurations, making modifications, and loading configurations into the system again. This is obviously useful for automation and moving configurations between different environments. Let us know if you have any questions or feedback. info@curity.io.